Americans sometimes interpret British humor as too dark, too self-deprecating, or just plain confusing. Meanwhile, the British often see American humor as loud, obvious, or a little too earnest. But here's the truth. The gap isn't just about jokes, it's about culture. It's about two nations shaped by different histories, different attitudes toward authority, even different ways of coping with hardship. Humor is a mirror, reflecting how people survive, connect, and tell their story. In this video, we're going to unpack that mirror. We'll explore why Americans often find themselves puzzled by British comedy, the cultural roots of that divide, and what it says about both nations. And along the way, you may discover something surprising, that humor is more than entertainment. It's a window into identity, resilience, and even national character. So the next time a British friend drops a sarcastic remark that leaves an American scratching their head, or an American sitcom makes a Brit roll their eyes, you'll know it's not just about taste. It's about the deep, fascinating ways humor reveals who we are. 1. The power of understatement. At the heart of British humor lies understatement, the art of saying less while meaning much more. It's the kind of humor that hides its punch beneath layers of subtlety, so if you blink, you might miss it. For the British, understatement is not just a joke. It's a cultural posture, a way of keeping emotions in check, of never appearing too dramatic, of laughing quietly at the absurdity of life. Take a moment to imagine a rainy day in London. The streets are slick, umbrellas are turning inside out, and a man stands drenched from head to toe. An American might shout, "This is a disaster," but a Brit with that dry smile might mutter, "Bit damp out, isn't it?" That's not just weather commentary, it's humor wrapped in understatement. For many Americans, this lands strangely. They're used to humor that announces itself with energy, that builds to a clear, undeniable punchline. A joke is meant to be obvious, to gather everyone in the room with the same rhythm. British understatement, on the other hand, often requires the listener to lean in, to catch the wink beneath the words. This difference comes from deeper cultural roots. American culture prizes self-expression and confidence. It's a land where boldness is rewarded, where being direct is seen as being honest. British culture, shaped by centuries of class hierarchy and a stiff upper lip, developed a preference for subtlety, restraint, and emotional coolness. Humor became a release valve for that restraint, a way to acknowledge hardship without ever appearing to complain. To an American ear, the understatement can sound almost confusing. Why make light of something serious? Why not call it what it is? But for the British, understatement isn't about diminishing, it's about transforming life's struggles into something bearable. It's a way of saying, yes, things are tough, but we can still laugh. And here's where the misunderstanding deepens. What sounds to Americans like avoidance or even dishonesty is, to the British, resilience. Humor for them is not a spotlight demanding attention. It's a quiet lantern in the dark. But understatement is only the beginning. If Americans struggle to catch the low-key quip, they're often even more baffled by something else the British love deeply: irony. 2. The obsession with irony. If understatement is the backbone of British humor, irony is its heartbeat. It's everywhere, in conversations, TV shows, and even in the way Brits talk about themselves. Irony is about saying the opposite of what you mean, often with a straight face, leaving the listener to catch the twist. Picture this. Someone burns dinner, the smoke alarm goes off, and instead of apologizing, a Brit shrugs and says, "Well, that went perfectly." The humor lives in the contradiction, in the gap between words and reality. To Americans, this can be confusing, even disorienting. American humor is often more literal. Sarcasm exists, of course, but it's usually exaggerated, signaled with tone or expression, so no one misses the joke. British irony, by contrast, is delivered so dryly that you could believe it was serious if you weren't paying close attention. The roots of this difference go deep. In Britain, irony evolved as a tool of survival. Through centuries of war, rationing, and class tension, irony became a way to cope with hardship, laughing at the pain without confronting it directly. It's also a form of social camouflage. By wrapping truth in irony, you can express frustration, rebellion, or criticism without being outright confrontational. Americans raised in a culture that prizes clarity and positivity often miss the wink. What sounds to them like negativity or passive aggressiveness is, to the British, playful resilience. It's not about being cruel, it's about finding humor in contradiction. Irony is also woven into British identity. Take shows like The Office, the original UK version. The humor isn't in big punchlines, but in the painfully awkward silences, the ironic contrasts between how people see themselves and how they truly are. For many Americans, watching it feels uncomfortable rather than funny. They ask, when does the joke happen? Not realizing that the silence itself is the joke. This obsession with irony can sometimes feel like a game of chess. To fully appreciate it, you need to anticipate what's unsaid, what's implied, and what's being flipped upside down. Americans who are used to humor as a clear, universal handshake often find themselves wondering if they've just been insulted or invited into a laugh. Irony thrives in Britain because it reflects the national character, reserved, skeptical, and deeply aware of life's absurd contradictions. And when irony mixes with something else the British are famous for, self-deprecation, the gap in understanding only widens. 3. Self-deprecating humor. If there's one trait that defines British comedy, it's the willingness to laugh at oneself. Self-deprecating humor is a national pastime, a badge of honor. In Britain, it's often seen as the most polite form of humor, because rather than making fun of others, you turn the joke inward. Imagine a British politician stepping onto a stage after a stumble and saying, "Well, that's the most graceful entrance you'll see tonight." Or a friend who, after burning a meal, quips, "I'm clearly destined for a Michelin star." The joke isn't about triumph. It's about embracing failure, imperfection, and awkwardness with a smile. For Americans, this can feel odd. In the US, humor often celebrates confidence and exaggerates success. Stand-up comedians brag. Storytellers spin tales where they come out on top. And sitcom characters often get the laugh by outsmarting someone else. Self-deprecation exists in America, but it's usually balanced with reassurance. After all, the American ethos is built on self-belief, optimism, and the pursuit of achievement. The British approach is almost the opposite. Centuries of rigid class systems and social hierarchies encouraged humility. Showing off was frowned upon, but laughing at your own shortcomings was a way to fit in. It signals, I don't think I'm better than anyone else. And in a culture where blending in often mattered more than standing out, this kind of humor became second nature. The deeper psychology is fascinating. Self-deprecation isn't just a joke, it's armor. By mocking your own flaws, you beat others to it. You disarm criticism before it arrives, and in the process, you invite others to laugh with you rather than at you. Americans sometimes misread this as insecurity, as if the Brit is genuinely putting themselves down. But more often, it's a subtle form of confidence. The confidence to admit imperfection without shame. It's saying, I know I'm not flawless, and that's exactly why I can laugh. British comedies thrive on this style. Characters rarely emerge as heroes. They're bumbling, awkward, endlessly flawed, and that's the point. Shows like Mr. Bean or Blackadder revel in failure as comedy, while US shows more often build toward victory or redemption. Self-deprecating humor, at its core, reveals something deeper about the British spirit. A belief that life is too unpredictable, too full of absurdity, to take oneself too seriously. And yet, when this collides with the bold self-assurance of American humor, the cultural misunderstanding widens even further. Because while Brits laugh at themselves, Americans often laugh at the spectacle. And nowhere is that more visible than in slapstick and physical comedy, the next big divide. 4. Slapstick versus subtlety. Comedy often comes down to what people find universally funny, and here the US and UK couldn't be more different. Americans have long embraced slapstick, big, physical, obvious humor that doesn't need much explanation. From the Three Stooges to Jim Carrey, American comedy often leans on exaggerated movements, pratfalls, and over-the-top reactions that make audiences laugh instantly. It's humor you don't have to think about. It hits you in the gut. British humor, however, often prefers the opposite, subtlety. The joke isn't always in the banana peel slip. It's in the awkward pause, the raised eyebrow, the line delivered so dryly you wonder if it was even meant as a joke. Where American comedy is designed to make sure no one misses the laugh, British comedy dares you to notice it, or miss it entirely. Think about Mr. Bean. At first glance, it's slapstick, and Americans often enjoy it because the humor is universal. But what makes it distinctly British is the subtle layering, the small looks, the quiet absurdity of an ordinary man in extraordinary situations. There's no dialogue to spell out the joke. It trusts you to notice. Contrast that with something like Friends or The Big Bang Theory, where punchlines are clear and even emphasized with laugh tracks. These shows reflect an American preference for clarity. The audience knows exactly when to laugh, and the comedy builds momentum through rhythm. The cultural roots here are telling. In America, humor is often about entertainment, a spectacle that gathers everyone together in a shared laugh. In Britain, humor is often about wit, social nuance, and observation. The subtle joke is almost like an inside secret, rewarding those who catch it. This difference can create tension when jokes cross borders. To an American, British subtlety can feel too slow or too understated. Where's the punchline? They wonder. To a Brit, American slapstick can feel exaggerated, almost childish, like it's trying too hard to force laughter instead of earning it. But here's the deeper truth. Both forms of humor reflect how each culture processes life. In America, laughter is loud, communal, and energizing. In Britain, laughter is sly, private, and almost conspiratorial. One thrives on obvious spectacle, the other thrives on understatement. And when you put those two together, you begin to see why the same scene can make one side of the Atlantic roar, while the other sits in silence. But there's another layer to this divide, one that runs beneath both slapstick and subtlety. The very subject of the jokes themselves. Because while Americans often joke about others, Brits often joke about something much larger, themselves as a nation. 5. National self-mockery. One of the most striking things about British humor is how often it turns the joke onto Britain itself. Whether it's mocking the weather, poking fun at the royal family, or laughing at their own politicians, Brits are quick to joke about their national quirks. It's a kind of collective self-deprecation, a willingness to admit, we're a bit ridiculous, aren't we? For example, when trains run late, as they so often do, you'll hear Brits sigh and laugh. Well, nothing like a reliable British railway. Or when it rains for the third week in a row, someone will quip, ah yes, classic British summer. These aren't just complaints. They're shared cultural jokes that unite people through recognition of everyday absurdities. Americans, by contrast, are less inclined to mock the nation itself. Patriotism in the US is often tied to pride and optimism. National symbols like the flag, the military, or the presidency are treated with reverence, and humor about them can feel almost taboo. Sure, Americans poke fun at their politicians, but national self-mockery doesn't sit as comfortably in the culture. The difference stems from history. Britain's long history of empire, decline, and reinvention has bred a cultural humility, even cynicism. Laughing at the nation is a way to cope with its contradictions and flaws. In the US, by contrast, a younger nation built on ideals of freedom and success often views humor that undercuts pride as unpatriotic. This creates a disconnect. When a Brit jokes about the hopeless state of the government or the disaster of the weather, they're not tearing the nation down. They're bonding over shared frustrations. To Americans, the same joke can feel overly negative, even ungrateful. It's also why British satire, from Yes Minister to Spitting Image, is often biting and unrelenting, targeting the nation's own systems with surgical precision. In the US, satire like Saturday Night Live certainly pokes fun at politics, but often with a lighter, more entertainment-driven edge. National self-mockery reveals a key truth about British humor. It thrives on imperfection. The joke is that Britain is never quite what it claims to be, and that's okay. For Americans, whose humor is tied more to aspiration and confidence, this perspective can feel foreign. But the divide grows even sharper when humor touches another sensitive subject: authority itself. Because while Americans often celebrate authority figures, Brits love nothing more than to cut them down to size. 6. Mocking authority. If there's one thing British humor never hesitates to do, it's mocking authority. From the monarchy to politicians, teachers to bosses, anyone in a position of power is fair game. In fact, some of Britain's most famous comedy is built on puncturing the dignity of authority figures. Take shows like Yes Minister or The Thick of It. They don't just make fun of political systems, they portray leaders as bumbling, hypocritical, or completely out of touch. Even in Monty Python, kings and knights, symbols of power, are reduced to absurd caricatures. The underlying message is clear. Don't take authority too seriously because those in charge are just as flawed, foolish, and human as everyone else. This resonates deeply in a country where class structures and hierarchies have historically been rigid. Humor became a way to resist that order, to level the playing field by laughing at the people above you. It's a quiet rebellion, done with wit instead of protest. Americans, however, often have a different relationship with authority. The nation was founded in rebellion against monarchy, but ironically, this gave birth to a culture that reveres its own symbols of power: presidents, the flag, the military. Comedy about authority exists, of course. The Daily Show or Saturday Night Live prove that. But it tends to soften the blow, keeping satire entertaining rather than merciless. To a Brit, American humor about authority can feel too safe, too respectful. To an American, British mockery can seem harsh, even unpatriotic. This difference isn't just about comedy, it's about cultural trust. Americans often believe authority is something to aspire to. Brits believe it's something to laugh at. And this clash plays out in everyday life too. A British student might joke about a teacher's quirks in class, while an American student might hesitate, worried it crosses a line. In the workplace, Brits may swap jokes about clueless bosses, while Americans might see that as disrespectful. The beauty of British humor is that by mocking authority, it rebalances power. It reminds everyone that no one is too high to fall. But when this humor crosses the Atlantic, it can be misinterpreted as cynicism or even hostility. And the divide grows wider still when we turn to another key difference: the role of awkwardness. Because while Americans often try to avoid it, the British have mastered turning awkwardness itself into comedy gold. 7. Awkwardness as comedy. If there's one realm where British humor truly shines, it's in the art of awkwardness. Where Americans often rush to fill silences and smooth over tension, the British lean into it. They let it breathe, stretch, and grow until it becomes funny precisely because it's so uncomfortable. Think of the original UK version of The Office. The cringeworthy pauses, the fumbling small talk, the boss who doesn't realize he's embarrassing himself. This is comedy born out of social discomfort. For British audiences, these moments feel painfully real and therefore hilarious. They see themselves in the awkwardness of daily life. The missed handshake, the overly long goodbye, the meeting that goes off the rails. Americans, on the other hand, often find this style confusing, even unbearable. The American remake of The Office softened the awkwardness, adding more punchlines and clearer jokes. Why? Because American audiences tend to prefer resolution. They want the tension broken quickly, the joke delivered, and the laugh earned. Long silences or lingering embarrassment can feel less like comedy and more like failure. The difference comes down to cultural comfort with vulnerability. In Britain, awkwardness is embraced as a shared human flaw. By laughing at it, you normalize it. You say, we're all a bit clumsy in life. Let's enjoy it together. In America, awkwardness is something to be avoided or overcome. Humor is often about confidence, timing, and control, not about losing face. This is why a British dinner party might end in guests laughing over an uncomfortable silence, while an American one might quickly shift the subject to keep the mood upbeat. Awkwardness in British humor serves a deeper purpose too. It highlights the absurdity of social rules and expectations. Why do we feel the need to fill every silence? Why do we stumble over polite small talk? By turning these moments into comedy, the British not only laugh at themselves, but also quietly question the social structures around them. To Americans, though, this can feel alien. They might watch a British comedy scene and wonder, why isn't anyone saying anything funny? Not realizing that the silence itself is the joke. This love of awkwardness adds to the cultural gap. For Brits, it's sharp social observation. For Americans, it can feel like a joke that never lands. And yet, awkwardness is just one piece of the puzzle. To really understand the divide, we also need to look at the darker side of humor, the willingness of the British to go places Americans often avoid. 8. The darker edge of British humor. British humor has a reputation for going to darker, edgier places than American comedy often dares. Death, failure, tragedy, misery. These subjects aren't avoided. They're embraced and somehow turned into laughter. To outsiders, especially Americans, this can feel unsettling. How can anyone find humor in something so grim? Take the long-running British series Blackadder. Much of its comedy comes from bleak settings: war, politics, betrayal. And yet it's hilarious precisely because the characters are so cynical about their own fate. Even Monty Python famously ended a scene about crucifixion with a cheerful song. Always look on the bright side of life. It's not denial, it's defiance. Humor becomes a way of facing life's darkest truths without fear. Americans, by contrast, tend to keep comedy and tragedy apart. Comedies are light, positive, uplifting. Tragedies are serious, dramatic, heartfelt. Mixing the two can feel inappropriate, even offensive. An American sitcom usually resolves problems neatly by the end of an episode. British comedies, however, often leave characters worse off than before, the humor lying in the futility itself. The cultural roots again run deep. Britain endured centuries of hardship, wars, rationing, economic depressions. Dark humor became a coping mechanism, a way of surviving the unbearable by laughing at it. In America, with its more optimistic national narrative, comedy evolved as a celebration of possibility and success. To a Brit, joking about death isn't morbid, it's human. It says, we all face this, so why not laugh? To an American, the same joke might feel disrespectful, even cruel. The gap isn't just about humor, it's about worldview. One culture stares into the abyss and chuckles. The other prefers to look toward the horizon and smile. This difference can cause some of the sharpest misunderstandings. A British joke meant to lighten a heavy subject can land as offensive in America. An American comedy that avoids darker themes can feel shallow or naive in Britain. But this willingness to embrace the dark isn't just about topics, it's about tone. British humor often has an edge of cynicism, of skepticism about life's promises. And that too can feel foreign to Americans raised on a steady diet of hope and self-belief. Yet, for all its darkness, British humor is rarely cruel. It's inclusive. If life is absurd and difficult, then we're all in it together. The laughter is communal, not divisive. And that brings us to another critical piece of the puzzle: timing. Because beyond subject matter or tone, the very rhythm of British humor often leaves Americans scratching their heads. 9. The timing gap. Comedy isn't just about what you say, it's about when you say it. And this is one of the sharpest divides between British and American humor. American comedy thrives on rhythm. Think of a stand-up set or a sitcom like Friends. The punchlines come quickly, often stacked one after another with clear cues, pauses, raised voices, even laugh tracks, so the audience knows exactly when to laugh. Timing is crisp, predictable, and designed to keep energy high. British comedy, however, plays by different rules. Timing here is slower, more unpredictable, and often built around silences rather than sound. The pause before a line, the awkward gap after a joke, the deadpan delivery that never breaks. This is the essence of British timing. Instead of being told when to laugh, you're invited to discover it yourself. Take Ricky Gervais in the original The Office. The humor isn't just in what's said, it's in the painfully long silences after he says it when no one responds. The lack of reaction is the reaction, and that's what makes it funny. For Americans used to rapid-fire punchlines, these moments can feel confusing or uncomfortable. The cultural difference is revealing. In America, time is money, even in comedy. Audiences expect laughs per minute, a constant payoff for their attention. In Britain, timing is about tension and release. The longer you wait, the bigger the laugh, if you're willing to sit with the discomfort. This timing gap also reflects a deeper difference in social interaction. Americans tend to value enthusiasm, energy, and filling silence with words. Brits often see silence as part of the conversation, a space for subtlety, wit, or dry observation to land. When these two styles collide, misinterpretations abound. Americans might see British comedy as slow or awkward, while Brits might view American comedy as loud or obvious. Each side wonders, why don't they get it? But here's the thing, timing isn't just about laughs. It shapes how we see humor as a whole. For Brits, comedy is a slow burn, rewarding patience and observation. For Americans, comedy is a burst of fireworks, immediate and spectacular. And when you put timing together with irony, self-deprecation, and awkwardness, you start to see the full picture of why British humor feels so alien to American ears. But there's one more layer we can't ignore: the cultural context in which these jokes are told. Because humor doesn't exist in a vacuum, it's rooted in the values, history, and identity of a people. And in Britain, humor isn't just entertainment, it's a way of life. 10. Humor as a cultural lens. To truly understand why Americans often don't get British humor, you have to step back and see humor not just as comedy, but as culture. Because in Britain, humor isn't only about laughter, it's about survival, identity, and connection. For centuries, humor has been the British way of coping with hardship. Wars, rationing, political upheavals, endless gray skies. Rather than dwell on despair, the British chose to laugh at it. Humor became resilience, a shield against the weight of reality. That's why so much of it feels dark, understated, or self-mocking. It isn't about escaping life's struggles, it's about staring them in the face and smirking. In America, humor evolved differently. Built on ideals of optimism, possibility, and reinvention, American comedy reflects a belief in brighter tomorrows. Jokes are bigger, louder, and often rooted in exaggeration because they echo a culture that celebrates ambition and confidence. Comedy in the US is entertainment. In Britain, it's a coping mechanism. This is why misunderstandings happen. An American might see a British joke as negative, while a Brit might find an American joke naive. But both are simply reflections of the cultures they come from. One laughs to endure, the other laughs to inspire. Consider this. In Britain, cracking a joke during a funeral is not uncommon. It's a way to ease tension, to remind everyone that even in sorrow, there's light. In America, that same moment might feel deeply inappropriate. On the flip side, the enthusiastic, motivational humor of an American comedian can feel over the top or insincere to a Brit who prefers understatement. Humor then becomes a cultural lens. It shows us not only what people find funny, but what they value, what they fear, and how they see the world. For Brits, light humor is about humility, resilience, and cutting life down to size. For Americans, it's about energy, optimism, and celebrating the spectacle of life. And when these two meet, it's no surprise that confusion often follows. But that confusion is also an opportunity to see the world through another culture's eyes, to notice the beauty in what feels foreign, and perhaps to laugh in a new way ourselves. Because in the end, humor, whether dry or loud, subtle or slapstick, is one of the most human things we share. And if we can laugh together, even across misunderstandings, maybe we're not so different after all. So why is it that Americans and Brits so often miss each other's punchlines? At its core, it comes down to perspective. Humor is never just about jokes. It's about how a culture makes sense of the world. The British use humor as a shield, a way to soften life's blows by laughing at them first. Their comedy is dry, understated, sometimes painfully awkward, and often darker than outsiders expect. It's a language of resilience born out of centuries of hardship and history. To a Brit, humor says, life is tough, but if we laugh at it, maybe it won't crush us. Americans, by contrast, use humor as a spark, a way to energize, inspire, and bring people together in shared positivity. Their comedy is bigger, faster, and clearer, designed to lift spirits and remind people of possibility. To an American, humor says, life is full of promise and laughter makes the journey brighter. Neither style is better or worse. They are mirrors of the cultures that created them. The misunderstandings happen when we assume that humor should always sound familiar. But maybe the real magic is in those moments of confusion, when you don't laugh right away but pause and realize you're glimpsing the world through another lens. Because in that pause, you're not just watching comedy. You're witnessing another culture's way of coping, celebrating, and surviving. And that can be just as valuable as the laugh itself. In the end, humor, whether it's a British quip over endless rain or an American punchline shouted from a stage, reminds us of something deeply human. We all stumble, we all struggle, and we all need a reason to smile. The accents, timing, or delivery may differ, but the heart of it is the same: connection. And maybe that's the real joke. That across oceans, languages, and cultures, laughter is the one thing that proves we're not so different after all.